I can pinpoint the exact moment when I realized my marriage was a joke. Not just a regular joke, but one of those long, drawn-out ones where everyone else is laughing at you, and you're sitting there, smiling along like a fool, pretending you get it. It was a Thursday, which is the worst day for life-changing revelations. A Monday would have made sense. Mondays are designed for bad news. Even a Friday could have worked, at least then you have the weekend to drown your sorrows in pizza and questionable life choices. But no, it had to be a Thursday, the most boring day of the week. I was at home, minding my own business, which was my first mistake. I should have been at work, but I had the genius idea of taking a personal day. A whole day to myself, free of spreadsheets, awkward small talk with coworkers, and emails that start with, "just circling back on this." It was supposed to be a relaxing day. Instead, it became the day I realized my wife, Betty, had been treating our vows like a gym membership, something she signed up for, ignored completely, and only remembered when she needed an excuse. The house was quiet. Too quiet. You know the kind, where even the refrigerator hum sounds suspicious, like it's in on something you're not. Betty was at work, or so I thought, leaving me alone with my thoughts, which is never a good thing. I decided to finally deal with a minor tragedy I had been ignoring for months: the broken ceiling fan in the bedroom. It had been clicking like a metronome on caffeine, but I kept putting it off, because frankly, if I waited long enough, I figured the problem would fix itself. That had been my philosophy for most things in life, including my marriage. So, there I was, standing on a wobbly chair, attempting to tighten a loose screw, when I spotted it. A tiny, unremarkable speck on the ceiling. At first, I thought it was just dust, but as I leaned in, I realized it wasn't dust. It was a mark. A mark in the shape of a shoe print. Now, I'm not a detective, but even my under-caffeinated brain understood something wasn't right. Unless Betty had suddenly developed the ability to walk on ceilings like some kind of suburban Spider-Woman, that mark shouldn't have been there. And it wasn't my shoe print, unless I had started sleepwalking upside down. I climbed down, looked at the bed, then back at the ceiling. Then I did something I'm not proud of. I actually lay down on the bed to see if I could align my feet with the mark. Nothing. But then I moved to the edge of the bed and looked up again. That's when it clicked. That wasn't just a shoe print. It was a shoe print right above the headboard. I sat up slowly, feeling like a man who just realized he's been playing chess against himself and still losing. I stared at that stupid mark for a full minute, my brain replaying every single instance of Betty's late nights at the office like a montage in a bad movie. Then I did something even dumber. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe she had been doing yoga? No, that didn't make sense. Maybe it was there from when we first moved in and I had just never noticed? I stood up and walked out of the bedroom, deciding I was officially insane. But insanity is a funny thing. Once you start seeing cracks, you can't unsee them. It's like when you notice a typo in a printed book, it ruins everything. So, I started looking. Not snooping, just looking like a man who suddenly doesn't trust the foundation of his own house. And that's when I found the second clue. The thermostat. Now, I know what you're thinking. Anthony, how does a thermostat prove infidelity? Trust me, I wouldn't have thought so either until I noticed it had been changed. For 6 years, our house had stayed at a comfortable 72 degrees. That was the unspoken agreement, the one thing Betty and I never fought about. But today? Today it was set to 68. A full 4 degrees lower. That might not mean much to the average person, but to me? It was a screaming red flag. Betty hated the cold. She once made me turn the heat on in August because she claimed the air conditioning was giving her emotional frostbite. But now, suddenly, the house was practically an igloo? I stood there, staring at the thermostat like it had just insulted my mother. Then, another thought hit me. I walked over to the couch, pressed my hand down on the cushions. Still warm. I checked the coffee table. A cup. Half full. Still warm. Somebody had been in this house. Recently. And it wasn't me. And unless Betty had taken the day off work and suddenly developed a newfound love for the cold, there was only one explanation. I sat down, feeling oddly calm. I had always imagined that if I ever found out Betty was cheating, it would be some dramatic scene, her confessing through tears, me flipping over a chair in rage, even though I'm not the kind of guy who flips chairs. But instead, I just sat there, staring at a thermostat, feeling like a fool. And then, as if the universe had a sick sense of humor, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Betty was home. Which meant I had about 10 seconds to decide how to play this. Pretend everything was normal? Act like I hadn't just unraveled my entire marriage based on a ceiling shoe print and an air conditioning conspiracy? Or should I say something? I glanced at the thermostat one last time. 68 degrees. Nah. Let's see how long it takes her to realize that I already know. The front door opened, and in walked Betty, looking exactly like someone who had spent the day working, except she hadn't. I knew she hadn't. But she didn't know that I knew, which made this entire situation suddenly very entertaining. "Hey," she said, setting her purse down like she wasn't walking into a crime scene. I smiled. "Hey. How was work?" She sighed like I had just asked her to summarize the history of civilization. "Exhausting." "You?" "Oh, just fixing things around the house," I said, watching her carefully. "Little repairs here and there." That wasn't a lie. I had, technically, been fixing things, mainly my ignorance. She nodded and headed toward the bedroom. I followed, partly because I wanted to see what she'd do, and partly because I was now extremely curious about what she would touch first. She walked in, glanced around, and then, as expected, went straight for the thermostat. "Bingo! Did you turn this down?" she asked, frowning at the numbers like they had personally betrayed her. "Oh yeah," I said casually. It was really warm in here. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, but she quickly masked it. "You never complain about the temperature." "Yeah, well. Maybe I'm just noticing things more lately." She looked at me for half a second too long before turning back to the thermostat and pressing the button until it was back at a Betty-approved 72 degrees. Then, as if that hadn't just confirmed everything, she walked over to the bed and sat down. "Anything exciting happened today?" she asked, slipping off her shoes. I almost laughed. "Not really. Just did some cleaning." "Oh, by the way, I think you might have stepped in something." That did it. Her entire body tensed for half a second, so fast that most people wouldn't have caught it. But I did. "What?" "There's a mark on the ceiling," I said, as if I had just discovered an interesting fact about world geography. "Looks like a shoe print." She looked at me. I looked at her. Silence. And then, without missing a beat, she scoffed. "A shoe print? On the ceiling?" She shook her head and laughed like I had just accused her of running an underground smuggling operation. "Anthony, what are you even talking about?" "Oh, you know me," I said, grinning. "Always making wild observations. Like how the couch cushions were still warm when I sat on them earlier. Or how the coffee table had a half-full cup on it, even though you were supposedly at work all day. Or oh, this one's my favorite, how the house was set to 68 degrees when you hate the cold." I watched her expression change in real time. It was a fascinating thing, watching someone realize that their game had just been exposed. First, there was confusion, then mild amusement like I was joking, then the moment of panic she tried to hide behind a quick laugh. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked. "You sound a little off." "Oh, I'm great. I just had a lot of time to think today. About things. About patterns. About how some things don't quite add up." Her jaw tightened just a little. "Anthony, I don't know what you're getting at, but if you're trying to accuse me of something." "Accuse you?" I said, acting surprised. "I would never. I'm just saying it's funny how certain things don't make sense unless you look at them from a different angle." She forced a smile. "Like what?" I leaned against the doorway and crossed my arms. "Like why someone would need to brace themselves against the ceiling above our bed." There it was. That half-second hesitation, that flicker of fear behind her eyes before she recovered. You sound ridiculous, she said, standing up. Are you seriously saying that I'm not saying anything, I interrupted. I'm just wondering. You ever see one of those detective shows where the guy swears up and down that he didn't do it, but then he gets caught because of one tiny little thing? She folded her arms. Anthony, this is crazy. You're acting paranoid. Maybe, I admitted. Or maybe I just finally opened my eyes. The tension in the room was thick now, not because I was yelling or throwing things, but because I wasn't. Because I was completely calm. Because I was watching her scramble for a defense, and for the first time, she didn't have one ready. She looked at the shoe print on the ceiling, then back at me. Maybe it's from when we moved the bed, she tried. Oh, good thinking, I nodded. Except we didn't move the bed. Not even once. And if we had, why would a shoe print be up there instead of on the walls? She opened her mouth, closed it, then sighed. Anthony, this is stupid. No, what's stupid is thinking I wouldn't notice, I said. Another silence. Then, she played her last card. The classic. You're being really insecure right now. Ah, there it was. The last refuge of every guilty person caught red-handed. Blame the accuser. Gaslight them into thinking they're imagining things. It was almost impressive. Almost. I nodded, pretending to consider her words. Yeah, you might be right. Maybe I'm just overthinking. Maybe I've been watching too many crime shows. Her shoulders relaxed a little. Exactly. You need to let this go. Yeah. I mean, it's not like there's any actual proof, right? She smiled, relieved. Right. I smiled back. And then, right on cue, someone knocked on the door. And not just any knock. That specific kind of knock, hesitant, uncertain, but carrying the weight of someone who knew they had to be there. Betty turned pale. I grinned. Well, that's interesting, I said, walking toward the front door. She ran ahead of me. Anthony, don't. But I had already opened it. And standing there, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world, was a man. A man holding her phone. Hey, you left this in my car, he mumbled, as darting between us. I turned to Betty. Now that is unfortunate timing. Her face was frozen in sheer horror. I turned back to the guy and took the phone from his hand. Appreciate it, buddy. You want to stick around? I feel like we've got a lot to discuss. He turned a shade of red I had never seen before. No, I should go. Betty took a deep breath, probably ready to launch into some elaborate explanation. I held up a finger. Before you even start, I just have one question. She swallowed. What? I held up her phone. How exactly did your phone end up in his car? She opened her mouth. Closed it. And I had never been so entertained in my entire life. Betty's mouth opened and closed like she was manually rebooting herself, but no words came out. A truly tragic technical malfunction. Meanwhile, the guy Mr. Hey, you left this in my car, otherwise known as the world's worst accomplice, was shifting from foot to foot like he had just realized he had wandered into an active crime scene and wanted nothing more than to unwander himself immediately. So, I said, holding Betty's phone in my hand like it was some kind of ancient relic that held the power to end worlds, we've got a real mystery on our hands. I turned to the guy. Tell me, what's your name? The guy hesitated, glancing at Betty like maybe she had a pre-approved script for him to follow. She did not. Tom. Oh, Tom. Nice to meet you, Tom. I extended my hand. He looked at it like I had just offered him a live grenade. Come on, don't be rude, Tom. Shake my hand. He hesitated before reluctantly shaking it, his grip sweaty and weak. I gave him a reassuring nod. So, Tom, let's go over this together. Betty was at work all day today, correct? Tom, proving himself to be a truly horrible actor, nodded way too quickly. Yeah. Yeah, she was. Right. Except she wasn't. I turned to Betty. Because I was home all day, and funny enough, I don't remember seeing you leave this morning. I gave Tom a curious look. Tom, did she tell you she was at work? Tom had the exact look of a man who had just realized he was standing on a frozen lake and the ice had begun to crack. Yeah. I gasped, feigning shock. Betty! You mean to tell me you lied to Tom? That's not very nice. Poor guy probably thought he was helping out an honest, hard-working woman. I shook my head, deeply disappointed in her non-existent morals. I don't know, Tom, sounds like she hasn't been totally honest with either of us. Betty shot me a look that could have set me on fire. If I had any sense of self-preservation, I would have been intimidated. Instead, I was having the time of my life. Anthony, stop, Betty said through clenched teeth, her patience hanging on by a single thread. Stop what? Having a friendly conversation with Tom? I looked at him. By the way, Tom, what do you do for a living? His brain visibly short-circuited. Sales? Sales. Oh wow, that's exciting. What kind of sales? He blinked. Office supplies? An important job. Without office supplies, the entire world would collapse. I looked back at Betty. Betty, you never mentioned you were hanging out with a man who sells paper and staplers. Did you two meet during some emergency supply crisis? Did we run out of post-it notes? Tom, realizing he was not built for this level of interrogation, made a very brave decision. I gotta go. I gasped again, hand on my chest. Leaving so soon, Tom? But we were just getting to know each other. I just remembered I have something to do. Oh, sure, I nodded. Like getting as far away from this mess as humanly possible. He gave Betty a panicked look before turning and running to his car, peeling out of the driveway like he had just escaped a hostage situation. And just like that, it was just me and Betty. She exhaled sharply, arms crossed. Are you done? Not even a little. Her jaw clenched. Anthony, you are acting ridiculous. I scoffed. I'm ridiculous? I'm ridiculous? I pointed at the driveway. A random man just showed up at our house, returned your phone, and you think I'm the one being ridiculous? She rubbed her temple, probably wishing she had picked a man who was too stupid to notice things. Anthony, I don't have time for this. Oh, no, Betty, you do have time for this. In fact, you're making time for this. I held up her phone. Because as far as I know, this is my phone now, seeing as how it was returned to me. Her expression turned into something between pure rage and panic. Anthony, give me my phone. I pretended to think about it. No. Her eyes narrowed. Anthony. I raised an eyebrow. Betty. She took a step forward. I took a step back. You're being childish, she said. Oh, I'm being childish? I'm not the one who left my phone in some guy's car and then got caught lying about it. She inhaled deeply, clearly trying not to completely lose it. Give me my phone. I tapped my chin, then smiled. Sure. But first, explain to me why Tom, the world's most nervous office supply salesman, had it in the first place. She clenched her fists. I left it at work. I laughed. That's fascinating, because I thought you were with Tom. She looked like she wanted to strangle me, which, given the circumstances, was rich. Anthony, stop playing games. I smirked. Oh, but Betty, that's your thing. I'm just catching up. Her nostrils flared. Fine. I left it in his car by accident. Happy? I gasped dramatically. You were in his car? That's wild, because I thought you were at work all day. She groaned, rubbing her face. Anthony, just give me my phone. I shrugged. I could, or I could check to see what's on it first. Her whole body tensed. Don't you dare. I grinned. Why not? Something on here I shouldn't see? You have no right to look at my personal stuff. Oh, but I do have the right to question why my wife is playing musical chairs with her whereabouts. I held up the phone again. So, Betty, should I take a look, or are you gonna start explaining? Silence. Betty, who always had something to say, always had an answer, always had a defense, was silent. And that? That told me everything I needed to know. I smiled, flipping the phone over in my hand. You know what? I don't even need to look. I already have my answer. Her eyes darted between me and the phone. Anthony. I tossed it to her. She caught it, startled. Go ahead. Enjoy it. Call Tom, text him, do whatever you were gonna do before you got caught. She stared at me. What are you saying? I shrugged. I'm saying I'm done. Her eyes widened just a bit. Done with what? I laughed. With this. With you. Panic. Not big, not obvious, but there. Anthony, don't be dramatic. Oh, I'm not being dramatic. I'm being realistic. You see, I don't need to yell. I don't need to fight. Because the truth is, I pointed at her. You already lost. Her face turned pale. I smiled. Let her really think about what comes next. And for the first time in years, I actually felt good. Betty stood there, gripping her phone like it was the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. I could see the gears turning in her head, scrambling for a way out, a way to flip this on me, make herself the victim, twist reality into something where she wasn't completely, undeniably caught. It was almost impressive. Almost. She took a breath, her face smoothing into something that I guess was supposed to look reasonable. Anthony, let's just take a second. You're making this into a bigger deal than it is. I raised an eyebrow. I'm making this a big deal? I pointed to the front door. Betty, you had a random guy drop off your phone, looking like he'd rather be getting a root canal, and I'm the one being dramatic? She crossed her arms, which I had learned over the years was her I'm about to lie to your face stance. You're twisting things around. I told you I left it in his car by accident. That's all. I nodded slowly, pretending to think it over. Oh, okay. So you left your phone in Tom's car by accident. Which you only could have done if you were in his car in the first place. Which is interesting, because you told me you were at work all day. So tell me, Betty, how exactly do those two things add up? She rolled her eyes, sighing heavily, like I was the unreasonable one here. Anthony, I don't have time for this. Oh, no, please, take your time, I said, gesturing dramatically. I'd love to hear how this works. She clenched her jaw. I already told you what happened. You told me something, I agreed. You just forgot to make it believable. She made a sound somewhere between frustration and panic, but she was still holding on to the idea that she could wriggle out of this. I don't know what you want from me, Anthony. I laughed. Oh, that's easy. I want you to come up with one version of events that doesn't contradict itself every 5 seconds. Silence. She looked at me, I looked at her, and for the first time in this entire mess, I saw it real, actual fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of something much worse. Fear of consequences. I smiled. It's really sinking in now, huh? She blinked. What? That you're not gonna be able to talk your way out of this one. Her hands gripped her phone tighter. Anthony. Nah, I cut her off, shaking my head. No more Betty logic. No more twisting things around until I don't even know what I'm arguing about anymore. We both know what's going on here. And you know I know. So, go ahead. Say whatever you want, make up whatever story you need to, but just know, I don't buy a single word of it. She stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, finally, she spoke. So what? I laughed, caught off guard. So what? She lifted her chin, shifting from defensive to something else. What now, Anthony? You've made your little speech, you've made it very clear that you think you've caught me. So what do you actually plan on doing about it? Ah. There it was. The real Betty. See, Betty wasn't stupid. She knew how to survive. She knew how to manipulate, how to place situations in her favor. And now, realizing she was backed into a corner, she was testing the waters, trying to see if I had the spine to actually do something. I grinned. Oh, don't you worry. You'll find out soon enough. Her eyes narrowed. So, you don't actually have a plan? Oh, I do, I said cheerfully. I just prefer surprises. She scoffed. Right. So this is just some game to you? No, Betty. You made it a game. I folded my arms. I'm just finally playing along. She took a slow, careful breath. Anthony. We've been together a long time. I know you. You like your routines, you don't like change, and you definitely don't like making big, impulsive decisions. So, no matter how much you think you're done with me, we both know you won't actually do anything about it. I tilted my head. So what you're saying is, you're banking on me just rolling over and accepting this? She shrugged, and for the first time all night, she actually smiled. You always have before. Oof. And the worst part? She wasn't even wrong. I had let things slide before. I had let her brush past red flags, let her convince me that my instincts were wrong, let her control the narrative every single time. I had let things go because, deep down, I didn't want to start over. Didn't want to admit that the life I thought I built was actually just an illusion I had let her maintain. But this time? This time was different. Because this time, I wasn't confused. I wasn't doubting myself. I wasn't sitting there, wondering if I was being paranoid or insecure. I knew. And knowing changed everything. I stepped closer, dropping my voice just slightly. Well, Betty, I guess we'll just have to see if you're right. Her smile flickered for half a second, but she recovered quickly. We will. I nodded. Cool. Well, you have fun with that. I turned, walking out of the room, grabbing my keys off the counter. Where are you going? She asked, frowning. I grinned. Oh, don't worry about it. Just making some adjustments. She stiffened. Anthony, what does that mean? I didn't answer. I just walked out the door, whistling to myself. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the fool in this relationship anymore. I didn't go far. I didn't have to. All I needed was just enough time for Betty to sit alone in that house and stew in the unknown. That was the best part. She had no idea what was coming. She had played the same tricks for years, twist the truth, talk in circles, make sure I was always the confused one. But this time, she was the one left wondering. By the time I walked back into the house, she was already sitting on the couch, arms crossed, phone in her lap. If she was expecting some grand speech, she was about to be very disappointed. Okay, she said, watching me carefully. Are you done acting like a child? I grinned. Nope. She exhaled, like she was dealing with a particularly slow customer service representative. Anthony, let's stop this nonsense. What do you actually want? Oh, nothing, I said, setting my keys down. I just wanted to make sure you had enough time to think. She frowned. Think about what? About how badly you messed up. She scoffed. I didn't mess up anything. I nodded. Right. Totally. Leaving your phone in some guy's car by accident and getting caught in several conflicting lies wasn't a mess up at all. Perfect execution, really. She rolled her eyes. I don't have to explain myself to you. You do if you want to stay married, I said, stretching out on the chair across from her. And there it was again, the tiny flicker of panic before she shoved it back down. "You're not going to do anything, Anthony. Stop pretending like you have some master plan." I raised an eyebrow. "You sound pretty confident about that." She smirked. "Because I am confident." "You're just trying to scare me." "Am I?" "Yes," she said, tilting her head. "You're mad, you're hurt, and you want some kind of reaction out of me. But the thing is, Anthony, you're not that guy. You're not going to throw me out, you're not going to do something dramatic, and you're definitely not going to leave. So, again, I ask, what do you actually want?" I smiled, standing up. "All right, Betty. You want to know what I want?" "Yes," she said, exasperated. I grabbed my wallet from the counter, pulled out a credit card, and tossed it on the table. "First thing? Cancel that." She blinked. "What?" "Oh, and also," I grabbed another card, "toss that one too, that one." Her arms uncrossed. "Anthony." I pulled my phone out, scrolled a little, then turned it around to show her. "And just sent a quick email to HR, told them to remove you from my insurance." Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "Oh, and this one's my favorite," I said, pulling a piece of paper from my pocket and tossing it onto the table. "That's the lease to your car. Guess whose name it's under?" She looked down at the paper, then back up at me. I grinned. "Not yours." Her jaw clenched. "You're being ridiculous." "No, I'm being smart," I said, sitting back down. "See, you were right, Betty. I don't like change. I don't like impulsive decisions. So, I figured, instead of doing anything drastic, I'd just make a few adjustments." Her face was blank, but her grip on her phone had tightened. I nodded at it. "You thinking about calling someone? Maybe Tom? Maybe your mom? See if she'll let you move back in?" Silence. I leaned forward. "See, Betty, I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to throw things. I'm not even going to tell you to leave." I smiled. "But I am going to make this as inconvenient for you as humanly possible." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Anthony, let's be reasonable." "Oh, now you want reason?" I laughed. "Where was all that reason when you were sneaking around with Tom the office supply king?" She clenched her jaw. "I told you, I wasn't sneaking around." "Right," I interrupted. "Because accidentally leaving your phone in another man's car is so common. Happens to people all the time." Her hands curled into fists. "Fine. What's your goal here, Anthony? To make my life miserable?" I grinned. "No, Betty. That's what you did to me." She stood up abruptly. "I can't believe you're doing this." I shrugged. "Believe it." She paced a little, clearly running through every possible angle in her head. "You're being vindictive." "No, I'm being thorough." "You're making a mistake," she snapped. I chuckled. "Betty, my only mistake was thinking you were worth all the effort I put into this marriage." She stared at me, and for the first time all night, she didn't have a response. No snappy comeback, no clever deflection. Just silence. "Anyway," I said, stretching. "I'm exhausted. You have fun figuring out what to do next." Her eyes narrowed. "You can't just cut me off." I raised an eyebrow. "Can't I?" Her lips parted like she was about to argue, but she didn't. Because deep down, she knew. She knew she had finally pushed too far. I smiled. "Good night, Betty." And with that, I walked past her, leaving her standing there in the middle of the room. Because for the first time in years, she was the one left in the dark. Betty didn't leave right away. That would have been too easy. No, she spent the next few days acting like nothing had happened, like she was giving me time to cool off, like I was just having one of my moods and eventually, I'd get tired of making her life difficult. It was kind of adorable, in a pathetic way. She still slept in our bed, still used my car, still sat on the couch scrolling through her phone like she wasn't playing the weakest poker hand in history. Every now and then, she'd try to start a conversation, usually something casual, pretending like we were just a normal couple going through a little disagreement. "So, should we get someone to check the water heater?" she asked one evening, like she hadn't just spent the last few days in absolute marital limbo. I looked up from my laptop. "Oh, I don't know, Betty. What do you think?" She exhaled, setting her phone down. "Anthony, are you really going to keep this up?" I raised an eyebrow. This, she gestured vaguely at the air, like I was the unreasonable one here. Acting like everything is some game. I closed my laptop and smiled. "Oh, you mean the part where I'm not rolling over and letting you walk all over me?" She crossed her arms. "You're being petty." "No, you were petty," I said. "I'm just being efficient." Her jaw clenched. She hated this. Hated that she wasn't in control. Hated that I wasn't falling for whatever weak attempt at reconciliation she thought she could manage. She took a deep breath, probably counting to 10 in her head. "Okay, fine. Let's just talk like adults." I leaned back in my chair. "Sure, Betty. Let's talk." She hesitated. "I don't want to fight." "Neither do I." She hesitated again, clearly realizing this wasn't going to go the way she planned. "We've been together for a long time." "Yep. We've built a life together." "Uh-huh. And I just think we shouldn't throw it all away over a misunderstanding." I smiled. "A misunderstanding?" "Yes." She was gaining confidence now, thinking she had found the right angle. "I get that you're upset. I get that things look bad. But this doesn't have to be the end of us." I nodded. "You're right. This doesn't have to be the end of us." She blinked. "Wait, really?" "Yeah," I said. "We can keep things exactly the way they are." Her expression twisted in confusion. "What? You keep lying, I keep pretending to believe you, and we just exist in this weird, silent competition of who can outlast the other." Her face dropped. "Anthony. Or," I continued, "we can just call it what it is. Over." She swallowed. "You don't mean that." I grinned. "I really, really do." For the first time since this whole thing started, she looked genuinely rattled. Because in her mind, this was just another fight, another inconvenience she'd have to maneuver around. But now, she was realizing this wasn't something she could fix with a few half-hearted apologies and a couple of empty promises. "So that's it?" she asked, voice tight. "You're just giving up?" I laughed. "Giving up? Betty, I won." She scoffed. "How exactly do you think you won here?" I gestured around the house. "Well, for starters, I get to stay here." Her lips pressed together. And I get to move on, not spend another day wondering when you're going to lie to me again." She rolled her eyes. "Anthony, you're acting like I'm some monster." "No, Betty," I said, standing up. "A monster would have been honest about what they were. You're just a coward." Her face flushed red. "That's not fair." "Oh, suddenly fairness matters to you?" I scoffed. "Where was all that concern for fairness when you were sneaking around behind my back?" Silence. She had nothing. Because there was nothing left to say. After a long pause, she sighed. "So what now?" I shrugged. "That's up to you." Her fingers curled against her arms. "You really want me to leave?" I tilted my head. "Well, it's either that or you stay here as my ex-wife while I start bringing new women home." "Your call." Her face twisted in disgust. "You wouldn't." I smirked. "Try me." That did it. She grabbed her phone, walked toward the bedroom, and slammed the door shut. 15 minutes later, I heard her making a call. "Hey," she said, her voice lower. Yeah, I need a favor. I smiled. She was making arrangements. Good. She was finally getting it. 2 days later, she was gone. No dramatic exit, no final attempt to win me back, just a quiet, bitter retreat. She packed her things, avoided eye contact, and left without saying much. I didn't watch her go. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one getting left behind. I was the one walking away. And it felt great. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like button and rate the story in the comments.